Howdy! Howdy! Happy Tuesday. How are y'all doing today?
We're good.
Good. It's not raining today, so that's the first time in a while, right? Maybe it will this afternoon. We'll avoid it. But welcome to this is our fourth session for our nutrition series. So I'm glad you guys are here. Just a heads up. Unfortunately, the bulb in the projector is out, so that is why we have the handouts, which might be more beneficial that you have something that you can write on. And for our folks who are doing our live stream, please know that if you email us at wellness@tamu.edu, we can send you the PowerPoint presentation as soon as possible. So just keep that in mind. We want you guys to have these resources, and unfortunately, we just can't get them up on the screen today. So I apologize for the technical difficulties, but that's the world we live in. So we do what we can and take it back to the old school way of writing pen and paper, right? But other than that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan so that we can learn a little bit more about, you guys did nutrition through the life cycle last week, which I wasn't here for. And what's today?
Healthy aging.
Healthy aging. All right, fabulous. So we're going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, howdy.
Howdy.
I've seen familiar faces here, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Megan Wyndham. I'm a registered and licensed dietitian, and I work in the B12 Health Center on campus. So I see students regularly for any type of nutrition need. But what today we're going to focus on is more of the healthy nutrition and aging. And so when we think about aging, last presentation talked a little bit about more of the young teens, toddlers, kids, young adults. So when we talk about aging, some of you may think, well, what age does that start at? Where do I think about that? I would really say mid-40s and on is what we're looking at here. You're going to see some things here more of an elderly adult. So some of you, maybe some parents, grandparents that you're caregivers too, that we're going to see some issues come up in as well. But this can really be beneficial for any type of 40 and up, I would say. And if you're not 40 and up, think about just long-term health and what you would want to do to prevent that. So all of you have the slides in front of you. I know the print is a little bit small on that, so I'm going to read through a lot of this as well. But feel free to take notes if you want. Ask questions as we go throughout as well. If there's something that you're reading or seeing, please feel free to stop me at any point, and we can make this as interactive as possible without having the nice pretty video here. So when we think about healthy aging or just aging in general, we certainly have physiological changes. One in particular, our gastrointestinal tract slows down. So we tend to digest food a little bit differently, a little bit slower. We absorb nutrients differently, and we're going to talk through a lot of that today. Certainly impaired hearing and vision. So as we get older, things just don't work as well. Not just our body, but some of those audible functions too. Hearing, vision, sense of smell, all of those change a little bit. Taste and smell is another one. So as we think of older adults, one thing that we'll see in here often is enhancing flavor through different herbs, spices, things like that to get the taste up a little bit. Which leads all to a diminished appetite. So for those of you who may be caring for other family members, friends, that type of thing, I notice in a lot of just even some of my older adults that I work with, or even some of my family and relatives, the appetite isn't there as much. So it's the slower gastrointestinal tract, it's the sense of taste and smell. Things are slowing down a little bit to where we're just not wanting as much to eat, which can lead to nutrition deficiencies. Thirst is another one as well. We just don't sense that as much. So longevity, how can we work to be healthy? And this is one thing that often gets overlooked in the media. We think about how can we prevent health, or how can we cure diseases or treat diseases, but how can we get to that 100-year-old birthday cake or 100-year-old celebration? So the Center for Disease Control and Prevention suggests that longevity depends on a few things. One is 10% on access to healthcare. So when we're thinking about healthcare and what that means, do we have access to that, and do we have great resources? 19% is genetics, and I tell that to students all the time. If you're gaining weight in certain areas, if you have maybe high cholesterol, which we talked about in one of our previous presentations, a lot of it's genetic, and so some of those things we're just not going to be able to change. 20% is environment, but 51% is lifestyle factors such as nutrition, exercise, diet. And if we look at that, that's the majority of what we can control and what we can change. Many of those other things we cannot. So the My Plate for older adults looks very similar to something that we're thinking about just for a My Plate in general. Half of our plate is still fruits and vegetables. Half of our, or fourth of our plate is grains, but we really want to try to incorporate our whole grains. A fourth of that being our protein and our low-fat dairy. So it's very similar. The portions are what usually changes as we get older. Remember, the decreased appetite, just not wanting to eat because we don't taste as well. Our gastrointestinal tract is a little bit slower. So these are all things that we want to include, but we've got to make sure we make these foods nutrient dense too. If we're not wanting to eat a lot or there's just appetite changes, we've got to make sure we're choosing great foods here, and we're going to talk about each of those. So let's start with protein here. As our intake tends to decrease, so does the body's ability to digest protein. Protein takes a little bit longer to digest, a little bit harder to digest. So this is one thing that often gets narrowed down in an elderly patient or an older adult. But when we don't have enough protein, remember protein, red meats in particular, have iron, great source of rich iron source for our blood vessels, for our nutrients, anemia in particular, we can become a little bit more susceptible to illness. And as we get older, our immune system decreases just like the rest of our body. Protein is great for healing from an illness. If we had a surgery, if we're looking at our just body's changes in particular, protein needs, we think of that more of a weightlifter, a bodybuilder, a young teen. But as we age, that's really where our protein needs increase to prevent the muscle loss, prevent the muscle wasting. And in particular, I can't tell you a lot of older women that I see don't eat enough protein or do enough bone building activities of lifting weights or doing own body weights. And then we're seeing what we call sarcopenia, which we'll talk about here, which is lack of muscle loss. And so when we see that muscle dwindling, that's where we have a little bit more body fat, and then we're just not able to recover as much. So lack of protein can lead to prolonged illnesses and just long-term health complications. So we want to make sure we get enough of that, a fourth of the plate being that protein. We talk about malnutrition here in older adults, and when I hear malnutrition, the first thing that always comes to my mind is third world countries, starving children, not getting enough. But I would challenge you to think about malnutrition as just mal, meaning poor or bad nutrition. And so it's really not so much as we're under eating or we're not eating enough, but it's what we're eating. So poor value of what we're consuming. And that's really where we're seeing some changes in these older adults. So it's undernutrition, it can be. So it's not getting enough calories, leading to weight loss, lack of essential nutrients. But it can be overnutrition of the wrong things. So what it says here too is the less physical activity, the risk of becoming overweight, missing out on those key nutrients. So malnutrition can be under or over or just poor choices in particular, whether it's lifestyle factors, whether it's environment, maybe it's the setting that they live in, or maybe it's even just accessibility to food. We think about, I think about just like H-E-B and curbside and all these things that are really booming. And on one hand, I think, gosh, what have we come to? We're not even wanting to get out and go into the store, and are we lazy? But then I think about our older adults and how that's so beneficial for someone like me, who I mentioned last time. My grandmother's 93, can't drive. She can have someone order that for her and go pick it up without having to take her and do. And so there's a lot of great benefit to that. But we still have to make the right choices and know what we're making. So in general, I think there's certainly the accessibility of resources is much greater than it used to be, whether it's healthcare, whether it's food or exercise, but we still have to know what to do and how to utilize that. So malnutrition cannot just affect our body physically, but it can affect other things, dental being one of those. So if we have a poor diet, it can cause issues with our dental health. Poor dental health then causes us not want to eat or choose to eat. So it just is kind of this never-ending circle that happens with our dental health. So missing teeth, painful teeth, not taking care of our teeth can lead to not getting nutrients that we need or not knowing how to consume those. So it all kind of comes full circle here, not just thinking about the specific food. So when we don't have great dental health or we don't take care of that, the diet variety decreases. Our consumption of greasy, fatty, high-carb foods, because it's easy to eat, it's soft to eat, that's something that we consume. White bread, white pudding, white potatoes, it's just things that we eat over and over. There's very little protein in that and not as many nutrients as we would get from other things as well. So something to keep in mind here. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this. Since you have the slides, it's not myth versus fact so much. You see what the result is. But tell me what you think about this statement. It doesn't matter if you eat alone. You have the information in front of you, but what do you think about that maybe from your own experience, personally or with family members or friends? How do you think that affects our eating patterns if we eat alone versus with others?
It's
Yes.
worse.
If we eat alone?
Yes, because usually I'm cooking for the family, eat with the family, and if no one's around, I tend to just grab a bag of chips and...
Absolutely. Right. It's whatever's easy. It doesn't matter. I'm not
Because it's just me.
Yeah. What else? Anything else? Yes.
Social aspect of eating, which affects your health too. So,
Yeah, and what would you say, in a good way or a bad way, or?
well, if you're eating alone, you don't have that social aspect. So.
Yeah, and I would say it could even go flip side too, of overeating in a social environment or feeling more comfortable in that setting to where we tend to eat less healthy foods because friends are eating it or surrounding are. Excellent. Other points with this. Has anyone witnessed this firsthand with maybe a family member, or I know you kind of mentioned yourself, but anyone in particular you've seen maybe as they're living alone, their health declining? I see it often too. Like I keep bringing up my grandmother, but she's 93 and lives alone, and how her health has declined a little bit. While she's in great shape and does well, sometimes I think if she was in an assisted living location or with someone regularly, how much better she would do because someone's making her eat or they're encouraging her to eat more. So it does matter if we eat alone, and I think we really need to take this into effect for not only ourselves, but who we're taking care of. So we tend to eat less. They usually eat when they're hungry, maybe not on a regular schedule. So it may be, well, I usually eat at noon with my family, but they're not here today, so I'm just going to eat a snack at 3 o'clock. So then now our nutrition goes down and we're into that malnutrition piece. Frequently skip meals. Think about this population too as we get older, so I would even say 80 plus, maybe forgetting if we ate or not not even remembering how much we had. And it can also cause loneliness, stress, anxiety, which leads to maybe eating less or eating more, and we can see some changes in that. So let's jump into nutrients of concern here. This is where I'm going to dive into a little bit more specific nutrients that are often more deficient in our elderly population, or as we age, that we have trouble getting more of. And so these few here, first calcium and vitamin D, we'll talk about that, B12, and then potassium. These are more of our nutrients of concern. How can we get more of these in our diet, not only as we try to age healthfully, but even preventing some of the degeneration of what we're seeing long term. Fiber is another one as well. Healthy fats, just encompassing those, again, I guess kind of a broader topic. But when we look at these in particular, it's important not to try to isolate them and say, well, I got my fiber today, or I got my dairy today, vitamin D and calcium. It's important to try to see how they can fit into our eating pattern and how we can make them more palatable to someone who doesn't really care for them or want to eat it just because they're just full all the time or don't have that hunger satisfaction cue. So calcium and vitamin D. What does calcium do? Many of you are probably aware of this. Strong bones. We heard of that when we were in preschool, elementary. It also, though, enables blood to clot. So if someone is on blood thinners or has issues with blood pressure and they're on medications, remember as we get older, things stop working. So we start to take medications for different things. Calcium helps with that. It also helps our muscles contract. So that helps with exercise and activity. And it also empowers the heart to beat. So our heart is a sodium-potassium pump, so it uses a lot of these electrolytes. Calcium is part of that as well. So if we have irregular heartbeats, if we have things that we are more at risk for with heart disease, calcium is a great thing to be incorporating in our diet as well.
Hey, Megan.
Yes.
Really quick, I'm getting lots of emails from people who are live streaming in. So just a quick heads up for those of you who may have just got on. I wanted to let you know that unfortunately our presentation, our PowerPoint presentation bulb is out, so we were not able to put up the presentation for today. It was a last minute thing that we were made aware about, but we will send out the PowerPoint slides as soon as possible, as soon as this is over. So just take note of that and email me at wellness@tamu.edu if you would like the slides, okay? Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's all right. So with the deficiency of calcium, so we don't get enough osteoporosis, lack of bone strength, bone health, and we'll dive into that a little bit deeper. So calcium and vitamin D go hand in hand. We need calcium to absorb vitamin D, and that's why you'll see them fortified in many milk products together, dairy, that type of thing. So we need them to go together. A deficiency is usually from insufficient calcium absorption from the diet. So if we don't get enough calcium, we won't have enough vitamin D coming in. So the difference in osteopenia and osteoporosis, you have a slide here in front of you on that. Osteopenia, the bone density has begun to dwindle, but it's not considered quite dangerous. So what I think of here is maybe a middle-aged female, so in their 50s, probably maybe even closer to 60s, we often see some osteopenia here. Remember, if you remember from the last presentation, for those of you who were here, or if you were not, once we hit 30 as a female, we don't develop any more bone mass. And so what we have then is what we get. And then as we get older, things stop working, as I mentioned, and that's something that happens as bone mass declines. So osteopenia is pretty common in this population. Osteoporosis is where the bone density levels become just at risk and at a level that's just not healthy for us. That's usually where we're seeing stress fractures. That's little breaks in our bones, maybe hairline fractures. We'll see broken hips if we fall. We'll see things like this because of lack of vitamin D and calcium throughout the life cycle. So especially for females 30 and up, I would highly encourage regular calcium and vitamin D consumption to help prevent some of these things. And if you're not doing it now, whatever age you are, I would still encourage you to continue doing that because it can help prevent the osteopenia from going to osteoporosis. Okay, questions on that, bone health? All right. So sources of calcium and vitamin D. You're going to see this on the slide here as well. So with our calcium, our dairy products, that's what often first comes to mind, milk, yogurts, cheeses. Green vegetables do have some in small amounts, so that's like our spinach, kale, leafy greens in particular. Sardines have them as well. Most people aren't eating a ton of sardines. Any type of fish with bones in it, so if we had salmon with little bones in it, that would be a source of calcium. But if you're like me, I don't really like to eat bones in my fish, so that's something to consider. But your main sources are going to be your dairy here. Your vitamin D, though, in particular, your fatty fish, so mackerel, tuna, salmon, these are all great sources of vitamin D. And you don't have to eat the bones to get the vitamin D here, but it's an excellent way to get just nutrients in with your fish. It's fortified in many of our orange juice products. You'll see that fortified with calcium and vitamin D. Soy milk, cereals, dairy products have it fortified as well. A lot of people are deficient in vitamin D and we don't even know it. There's no clear-cut symptom. Similar to like if we're deficient in iron, we feel tired, fatigued, a little bit more worn. We get our blood tested and it's like, yeah, you're iron deficient. With our vitamin D, we can get a blood test for that and we can see if we're deficient or not. But usually there's no clear-cut, I'm tired all the time, I'm fatigued symptom, my hair is falling out type symptom. So that's something I would always suggest to have your physician run or have a lab test done to see if you are. You can certainly take a supplement of vitamin D and they can recommend that for you if you need to, but your food first would be the best way to get that. So keeping that in mind. I think we'll see a lot more in the research and media of vitamin D because it's always been around, but it's more heavily studied right now. And it's very much linked to depression, some anxiety, mental health. And what we're finding is when our vitamin D levels are a little bit more normal, because we don't know if they're low or not, that's not a standard blood panel test unless you have it checked. We're finding that when we get them back to normal, we have a little bit less of that depression, anxiety, low mental health. And I see it regularly in some of my patients that I work with who are anti-anxiety medication, but when we do a vitamin D level and they're low and now they're taking some supplement or getting more through their food, they're feeling much better cognitively and physically. So it's something to keep in mind too, as we'll see more and more in the media about it. Okay, yes ma'am.
About the calcium in the orange juice, are they good to absorb?
The calcium in orange juice?
Yeah, they fortified with.
Yeah, so the question was things that are fortified with calcium and vitamin D, do we still absorb it? And that's an excellent question, because foods that naturally have calcium, vitamin D in it, like our fish with vitamin D, it's not added to it. Our dairy that naturally has calcium in it, it's not added to it. Those types of things we absorb a little bit better than our fortified products. Now, our cereals, if we look at the label there, there's some calcium in it and vitamin D in it. It wasn't originally in there. They added it to it. It's still a great way to get our calcium and vitamin D. We just don't absorb it as well as we do when it's naturally in the food. It's kind of like taking a vitamin versus it's taking iron supplement versus eating steak. We're going to absorb a whole lot more from that steak than we would the supplement, but the supplement is still going to give us something. So it's still fine to take.
What about sunshine?
Sunshine, yes, excellent question. So the linkage between vitamin D and sunshine, excellent way to get vitamin D. And I didn't include this on the slide, but vitamin D is known as the sunshine vitamin, because just being exposed in the sun 10 minutes I think they say like per day or even per week, would give you a great source of vitamin D. Your skin absorbs it. So certainly if you're overexposed to the sun, doesn't mean you're going to get just this raging source of vitamin D, but it's a great way to get vitamin D consumption.
And that helps
it does.
Calcium
be absorbed. Absorption. Yes. So anytime we have vitamin D, our calcium is going to be absorbed much better. If we just have great sources of calcium, like for example, Greek yogurt is an excellent source of calcium, but there's very little vitamin D in most of our Greek yogurts. Vitamin D is added to milk originally. When milk is strained multiple times to make Greek yogurt, the vitamin D fortification is usually not still present in it. Now, certain yogurts will have it. The majority, like Chobani, HEB, Faye, many of the basic Greek yogurt brands don't have it in there. I think we'll start to see them try to add it back in, but for some reason it's not in there because of the straining process. So that's a great source of calcium, but we may not absorb all that calcium because there's no vitamin D with that. So it's just something to keep in mind. But yes, if we can be exposed to the sun, just even walking outside, what they're even finding too is many of our young kids are vitamin D deficient. One, because they're not drinking milk at school anymore. Two, because we're lathering them with sunscreen. And while we don't want sunburns and skin cancers and that type of thing, sometimes the research is leading to that we're overprotecting them with that and not allowing for some of those vitamins to be absorbed. So it's a fine line and a balance to follow, but it is okay to be outside 10-15 minutes to get a little bit of that skin absorption of the vitamin D. If you notice, I mean, I'm kind of the same way. If I stand outside in the sun and just get a little bit, I feel better. And is it the vitamin D? I'm linked to think that it is because of just the feel-good effect that it does provide in that short time. So excellent point there. Other questions? Yes?
What do you think about like Ensure and drinks like that? My mother, she's elderly and she always tries to drink.
Absolutely. That's an excellent question. So when we'll talk about thirst and that type of thing here too, but a lot of times with these patients, elderly in particular, we're thinking 80 plus, who maybe just aren't wanting to eat much at all, who really lack that sense of appetite. Drinking our calories is a lot easier for them. You can get a whole lot in faster for them as well. So Ensure, Boost, those types of things are certainly appropriate to consume. Now, I have even a patient of mine right now who's a young adult in her 20s who really doesn't have much of an appetite, doesn't like to eat much. So my recommendation for her, while she would drink 6 Boosts a day if I let her, it still slows our gut motility down a little bit. So if we don't it's kind of like our muscles. If we never exercise them or move them, they kind of weaken. So if we never put physical food in and it's all liquid, well, our small intestine is like a muscle and it has to kind of do this going down. If we never put anything in, it never really has to work. So then when we do put something in, it kind of sits there and it can cause the constipation, and it just doesn't feel as good. So I would suggest a combination of the two if they're willing to do that. Even if it's blending some food, so blending fruits, blending vegetables, you're still going to get a little bit more of that motility stimulation there than you would just juicing it. But your Boost and Ensure is great. Another one that's a little bit more industrial, I guess, if you will, in a hospital setting. You can't buy it at H-E-B, but you can buy it online. It's called Caked Farms. It's a new one that is a lot of times at dietitian conferences. It's more for someone who may be gluten intolerant, sensitive to things. I use it a lot for my own grandmother. She's not gluten intolerant. She has no allergies. It was made for patients like that in a hospital setting who had sensitivities. But I like it because it's really nutrient dense and it tastes pretty good too compared to some of the others. So it's Kate, K-A-T-E Farms. And I certainly don't work for them or anything, but I like what they provide, and I use it with some of my eating disorder patients too. But Boost and Ensure is a great way to get some extra calories in for them. If they're willing to drink it, perfect for that. Yes, excellent question.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, B12 is another one. So with B12, this is a water-soluble vitamin. So unlike vitamin D, which is a fat-soluble vitamin, that's why when we're out in the sunshine, we can absorb that a little bit. It's absorbed through our body. Vitamin B12 is a water-soluble, so we need water to be absorbed. This is one, as you can see, it helps with nerves and blood cells. It helps make DNA. But really, as we age, B12 is much harder to absorb. It's just a natural fact of life. We absorb it in our large intestine. So we see here a lot of symptoms with this that you may find is numbness, tingling in the hands and feet, a little bit of that sense of tiredness, weakness. It's a source of a type of anemia, not the same as iron, but similar to that. Constipation, because our large intestine is trying to absorb that a little bit. Balance, depression, confusion, memory, dementia. But if we think about that, some of that just comes with age as well. But like I said, vitamin B12 is probably one of the #1 vitamins that most elderly Americans are deficient in because of where it's absorbed, and just as we age, we don't absorb it as much. It's just how it happens, and there's no real science behind it. It's just as we age, we don't absorb it. So when we see some of these things happening, we've got to make sure we get a little bit more of these foods in to help combat that. So those at risk for vitamin B12 deficiency, here anyone over the age of 50, if we're having due to lower levels of hydrochloric acid, and then like I said, less absorption of B12 naturally just happens. So those with B12 deficiencies usually have to receive a shot of B12. We can get it through our foods. We can get it through just a general multivitamin, but those who are truly deficient usually have to receive more than just a pill form of that. Those who have had any digestive disorders, we talked about irritable bowel syndrome, any type of constipation, diarrhea, those who have maybe had gastric bypass surgery or any type of stomach type surgeries, those would be a little bit more at risk as well. Remember, B12 is found mainly in our animal products. So if those are vegetarian or vegan patients, or as we age, meat is harder to chew. If our dental health is not well, we may not choose to eat a lot of meat, so this puts more at risk for B12 deficiency. So it's found only in animal products. This is beef, clams, fish, meat, poultry, eggs, and dairy. It's fortified in some of our breakfast cereals. And for those of my patients who really don't eat much meat, whether they're elderly or just a traditional vegetarian vegan, I like to recommend nutritional yeast. You can sometimes find this in just the natural food section. It's nothing fancy. You can just sprinkle it on macaroni. You can sprinkle it in yogurt. You can sprinkle it on oatmeal. And a lot of patients really like the flavor of it too. So it's something that you can add to your intake that would be a great source of B12 if you're choosing not to eat much meat, and especially for someone who's an elderly adult who isn't able to chew or digest that as much. Questions on that? Okay, this is going to be more of our food sources here. So with vitamin B, there's several B vitamins. So not to be confusing here, but I'll list I list all of them on the slide for you. So we have thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, pantothenic acid, B6, biotin, folic acid, B12. These are all B vitamins. And so when we look at these, most of the food sources are going to be meat. They're going to be eggs. They're going to be more of our animal type products. I know last time we talked a little bit about liver and organ meat. So biotin is a great, or beef liver or liver in particular is a great source of biotin. So you're going to see a lot of these come up for our B12 sources or B vitamins in particular. Like I said, between calcium and vitamin D, the next one that I would say is B vitamins, B12 in particular, making sure we're getting enough of those, because as we age, that just naturally declines for us. Okay, questions on calcium, vitamin D, B vitamins, something like that. Okay, potassium. Potassium is another one I mentioned at the very beginning as being kind of this key nutrient that we're lacking in. So with potassium, remember our heart is a sodium-potassium pump. So when we increase potassium, it can imbalance sodium, so we have to be really careful with this. And I'll give you just an overview of this, but I would always recommend talking to your physician if you're on a medication that is impacting heart regulation. So whether that's blood pressure or whether that's anything heart related, be careful with adding more potassium supplements, cutting out of what you're doing with that, because you certainly don't want to cause an arrhythmia in your heart because you're changing your intake. But in general, potassium can lower risk of high blood pressure, heart disease risk, and potassium is found in many of our fruits and vegetables. So getting more of these in our diet can be beneficial. Avocados, sweet potatoes, bananas, a little bit softer texture foods, but a great source of potassium here as well. So certainly don't be afraid to add potassium unless there is some sort of heart condition that you want to make sure you're clearing with your physician first. Some of our medications too will interfere with potassium, and we have to be careful of what we're taking and if we're consuming high potassium foods or low potassium foods. So just something to keep in mind. Or if you're caring for someone else and you're going to their doctor visit with them, those are great questions to ask of, okay, will this interfere with that? Or is there any vitamin or supplement or nutrient that I need to be careful with here? Okay. Soluble and insoluble dietary fiber. When we look at fiber, just in general, fiber helps to create that consistency of a normal bowel movement. This is one thing too that I know I've talked a little bit before, but I talk with students on this regularly, so I talk about diarrhea, constipation, stomach issues often. So just in conversation, my husband will go, okay, we don't need to talk about that, but it's on my mind because we talk about it all the time at work. But with our fiber in particular, you have to remember as we age too, we're a little bit less mobile, so we're not moving around as much. Maybe we're not getting as much in, but it helps with constipation and just relieving that. And I keep bringing up my grandmother because we talk regularly, and when she will always let me know, okay, well, I didn't have a normal bowel movement, or I can't go to the bathroom. And then when she started drinking the Boost or Cape Farms, it was like, gosh, it feels so much better. So it's something for them too. They're always thinking about or worried about, and fiber being one thing helps with moving that through. So with this in general, the elderly just have a reduction in, it says intestinal peristalsis. That's what I was mentioning, the gut just kind of moving those foods down. So when they already have that, we want to have fiber to keep the bowel movements regular. It helps with heart disease risk. It helps with diabetes. It helps with being overweight. So it's great for that. But the recommendation for 50 and older adults here is 30 grams per day for men and 21 grams per day for women. So if we can get those in various forms, whether it's like a look at the picture here, dried fruit. For those elderly patients who may not be able to sit down and eat a cup of grapes, they may be able to eat 1/4 of a cup of raisins and not feel so full doing that. Now we've got more fiber, now we've got some nutrients in, and we're getting higher calorie as well for them. Things like our cereals, things like our oats or bran, oatmeal in particular, a little bit softer to eat, a little bit easier, and it's a great source of fiber as well. So these are all excellent things, but as we mentioned, as we get older, we tend to choose the puddings, the softer texture, softer foods that usually have less fiber. So I would choose more of our foods such as the oats, things that are going to have a little, like a sweet potato, white potato, that's going to have a lot more fiber than just a pudding cup or just a a bowl of soft pureed type meat. Okay, so sources here, wheat bran, I mentioned that. Any of our whole grains, oats, quinoa, barley, any of those would be excellent. Nuts and seeds, coconut meat in particular is a little bit softer texture and is a great source of fiber as well. Beans and peas, these are very economical. So if I think of even elderly, maybe their income isn't as high as what they were. They're retired, they're not doing as much. They're counting on Social Security or even some long-term benefits to help them get through. So beans being a great source of fiber, but also economical here as well. Veggies, so artichoke, cauliflower, French beans, potatoes, all excellent sources again. And then our fruits, avocados, kumquat, which is a little bit, it almost looks like a little orange. Really any fruits are great sources of fiber here. Canned, fresh, or frozen would be beneficial for them. Well, I mentioned artichoke, and so on here it's like, well, what am I supposed to do with an artichoke, or how do I cook these things? And one thing I think about too with our elderly is not just, yeah, this is great, Megan, this is what they need to eat, but my relative or my husband or my friend can't even stand up to cook, or they're immobile, or they don't have the ability to do that. And so we have to take that into consideration. Maybe it's someone coming to help them, or maybe it's some of our prepackaged foods that can do that. But regardless, if we can have simple things for them to prepare or cook or assemble together, it can help them take ownership of what they're eating and feel more in charge of what they're doing. So I've listed a few things here. At the very end of the presentation, there's going to be links to what these artichoke recipes are, so you can see them. So there's the grilled cheese. That's a simple assembled together, put in the oven or put in a griddle. Some of these patients too, or some of these people you're thinking about, maybe don't have access to an oven, or maybe there's just not the resources for that. So some of these are pretty simple for that as well, and you'll have all the recipes there. Beans, same thing. And so we say, well, they don't want to eat beans because it causes maybe some gas, or maybe just doesn't feel good for them. So here's a whole list of ideas that they can do with beans, or incorporating beans in easy ways as well. Hummus, how many of you like hummus? Okay, and have you seen on the shelves too, there's a whole wide variety now. There's chocolate hummus, there's all kinds of different things. But this would be a great way to incorporate some beans. It's a softer texture. We can add even fruits or vegetables into something like this. We can dip it with a soft bread, a whole grain bread. We can do so much with this. And these would be great for our elderly population, not only getting fiber, but getting protein and getting some of those healthy grains in as well with what we're using to dip that in. So this can be store-bought, this can be made, but several of these recipes will be included for you as well. Okay, questions so far on that? All right, let's go through our healthy fats here. Healthy fats are another thing we often are a little bit more deficient in as we age. And as we age too, remember we want some of those higher calorie foods, so we need to feel fuller but still get good nutrients. So our omega-3s really help with just our overall brain development and function. That's from early age on. That's from pregnancy, that's from infant, that's for adulthood, young adulthood, and then even our elderly. We want to make sure we're getting enough of these healthy fats. Really what we're seeing with this is it helps with cholesterol, heart health, certainly it's anti-inflammatory. If we think about biologically where fat is usually stored, yes, it's stored on our body, but in our brain we have little neurons and synapses that are covered in what we call a phospholipid, lipid meaning fat. And so when it's covered in that fat, if it has a good protection, those nerves fire quickly. So it jumps from one to the other. But if it doesn't have a good conductor of that fat surrounding it, we don't think as quickly. And that's where we come up with dementia and we forget things. So this is getting a great source of healthy fats in our diet. Omega-3s in particular really helps prevent some of our Alzheimer's, our dementia, and just how we think too. And so they're really proving that with a lot of research recently. So our sources here, eating fatty fish twice a week. That's usually our tuna, our mackerel, or our salmon. Your frozen fish is just fine here as well. They don't need to go to a fresh fish market every week. Plant sources would be more of our flaxseed, our walnuts. Those are great sources of our omega-3s. But I would say no more than 3 grams per day, as it can cause our gastrointestinal discomfort. So we don't want too much. going on of more of our oils, or our, in particular like flaxseed, and that can cause some gastrointestinal discomfort. So we have different sources, like I've mentioned: salmon, tuna, sardines, some of our trout, walnuts, flaxseed, kale, spinach, and Brussels sprouts have a little bit of that ALA, which we want a good balance of DHA and ALA. So here again, a wide variety of foods, having them together really helps as well. Monounsaturated, so this is a different type of fat, but this can help with heart disease in particular. When we're looking at replacing some of our saturated fats, so saturated is a solid at room temperature, that's butter, Crisco, things that don't really melt sitting out. If we can replace that with more of our monounsaturated fats, that would be something like our canola oil, our vegetable oils, our olive oils. That can help a little bit more as well. And you're going to see some ways to replace saturated fats with some of these healthier fats, using nuts, using plant-based sources of our oils instead of those creamy dressings and that type of thing.
Okay, age-old debate, butter versus margarine, because margarine is fake, but butter is real.
Yeah,
You got
good question. So the question was butter versus margarine in the debate. So years ago, margarine was created using trans fats. Okay, so it was created using trans fats because it had less saturated fat. Remember, we were trying to cut that out. That was causing heart disease and that type of thing, and it still is a solid fat. But we cut out saturated fat, added trans fat to make it look the same as butter, not melt when it sat out at room temperature, and it was great. Everyone loved it, and we started using it. Well, as we come to think about research and find out, our trans fats aren't any better than saturated fat. So we were taking saturated fat, which isn't the best, but we took it out and replaced it with something worse. So now we see a lot of margarines being, some have trans fat still in it, so we have to look at the label. Many do not. Some margarines are made with more of a vegetable-based oil, so canola oil, vegetable oil. If we think about like our tub butters, that's mainly vegetable oil, and then it's air whipped into it, and it's when it sits out, it melts a little bit different than the stick. So many of our margarines now don't have as much trans fat. If we think about just taste and flavor of it though, I usually just use real butter. It tastes different, it cooks different, it bakes better, and we're not getting some of the additives that we're getting from the margarine. And go back just to the basic days of when all this started, it was used for certain reasons, and there's very little added to it. It's the cream off of the milk, and it's made into butter. Whereas our margarine has a lot more in it. So if there is a risk of heart disease though, or if you have family history of heart disease, I would always encourage more of a tub-based butter with the first ingredient, vegetable oil, or a plant-based oil, canola oil, vegetable oil, and there should be 0 grams of trans fat in it. If there's any trans fat in that, I would steer away from it. It's not any better than butter. But if you're choosing butter over margarine, that's perfectly fine too. From a taste perspective, from just overall health, it's fine. Just know there's more saturated fat in that. And saturated fat can be linked to more heart disease if there's a family risk of it. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, good question. So monounsaturated food sources, I mentioned many of our nuts here: almonds, hazelnuts, pecans, peanuts. Our olive, peanut, and canola oil are great sources of our monounsaturated fats. I like to bake a lot with canola oil because it has the monounsaturated fats in it. It has similar properties to our vegetable oil, but you're getting more monounsaturated fats from that. And seeds, pumpkin seeds. We're in October now, so a great source of monounsaturated fats there as well. Okay, myth or fact here, coffee has health benefits. What do you think about that? Does coffee have health benefits?
You're saying 1 to 2 cups a day does.
I feel like it just started yesterday. It was like, coffee's so great for you.
Yeah. And it is. And we this is true. So coffee does have health benefits. Drinking a moderate risk is shown to lower the risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's disease, because of the anti-inflammatory effects of the antioxidants in our coffee. Antioxidants, if you recall, it's just a type of we have free radicals floating around in our body, and so any type of antioxidant helps to decrease that. And antioxidants are found in many of our fruits and vegetables, but coffee has been shown to have some of those antioxidant benefits in it. It's usually what we add to the coffee that's causing us more harm than good. And some people do a great job of keeping it pretty simple, and then others go crazy and drink the loaded calorie Starbucks with very little nutrition in it. But I like to use this as a way, so say you have an elderly person you're taking care of who loves to drink coffee. Well, maybe we could add milk to that, or we could add some source of dairy to that to help to prevent bone disease long term, or help to stop the progression of it. So we can certainly add your milk to it to help with that. If you added a little bit of sugar, it would be okay, but I wouldn't encourage you to add a lot of the syrups, sweeteners, that type of thing, because that's when we get to more calories but less nutrition. So they're filling up on this drink that tastes good, but the nutrition isn't like a booster Ensure. And with even our coffee, we could add a little booster Ensure to it if you wanted to flavor that and boost the calories that way. So coffee is fine to drink. It's really one moderation, so no more than about 4 cups. That's 8 ounces per day. And trying to be careful what you're adding to it. Okay, so in summary, before we open it up for questions, really focus on fruits and vegetables for fiber. We want to add fish and beans. Remember, beans, great source of fiber and protein, fish, brain health, and development. Whole grains per day, the goal is 3 ounces per day. That's really not that much. That's like 3 pieces of bread. So we're not looking at a ton of whole grains, but when we can incorporate them, those are going to be better. We want to have 3 servings minimum of low-fat or fat-free dairy. For someone who's trying to gain weight or someone who's struggling with weight loss, I would encourage more of the full-fat dairy to help them get a little bit more calories per the volume that they're having. Switching to our healthy fats, so using olive oil, canola oil, avocado oil is another oil that's out there that's great to cook with. It doesn't taste like avocado, so if you like avocados, sorry. If you hate avocados, great. You're getting good benefits, but you're not getting the same flavor as an avocado. So those are great to use. Usually you're going to find that in the oil section, sometimes in the specialty section, but great source there as well. And trying to add those healthy fats for 1, calories for these patients, and 2, making sure they're getting more flavor. With flavor too, and we didn't talk a whole lot about this, adding things like herbs, spices, that type of thing to enhance flavor would be much better than adding a lot of salt or sodium-rich seasonings to their meal. Sometimes you have to remember they're not drinking a whole lot. Their sense of thirst is really gone, so we're dehydrating them even more if we add a lot of salt. If they don't like the taste of food and they want more flavor because their taste buds are decreasing, we can add things to it like the herbs and spices, but I would highly discourage you from adding the salt, just a basic salt, because it is going to cause them to feel more thirsty, which then that helps them to drink some, but they're not going to be drinking the full amount that they need, and can cause dehydration and even heart issues because that sodium potassium pump there. So things like fresh herbs, things like Mrs. Dash is a great seasoning to add that's very low sodium. Pepper, that would be a great seasoning. Any of those would be appropriate to add for these types of patients. Activity is also key with this. So we mentioned at the very beginning, low protein levels or low intake of protein causing sarcopenia, breakdown of muscle. And if we don't use it, we lose it. So even simple activities of what they can do sitting in a chair, leg raises, pushing up a little bit using their arms, using cans of soup as little dumbbell type activities, filling milk jugs with water. So it can be very cheap. It can be very budget friendly and also easy for them to keep right by their bedside or right by them. That's more 80 plus. For those in this room too, that I would say 45 plus, even just trying to do some of your own body weight activities. So push-ups, lunges, crunches, sit-ups. That's even better than just feeling like you've got to go run 5 miles a day. Remember, once we get past 30, our bone mass is not there anymore. And so we've got to make sure that we're doing something to stimulate the bone health, which doing the weight-bearing exercises is what we've got to do. It doesn't have to be in the gym every day, but doing something of that nature can help stimulate a little bit more of our bone mass. Okay? Okay. You have the list of recipes too. It kind of breaks it down by the hummus, salmon, omega-3s, that type of thing. But what questions do you have? We have about 5 minutes or so. So is there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Where did you say we could find the nutritional yeast?
Usually, so the nutritional yeast, where can you find that? Usually, I've seen it in different places. Often it's going to be found like in sometimes the bulk I think of HEB, bulk section of HEB, vitamin supplement section. It's not an actual vitamin or a pill form. It almost just looks like little golden flakes. It's hard to describe, but if you Google a picture of it, you'll see. It looks like little flakes. And you'll see that usually in the health food section, maybe by the flaxseed, maybe by those types of areas. It can be in the store shelves, but it's kind of hit or miss of where they're going to locate that. But I would say finding it in the health food section would be most appropriate. But you should be able to find it at an HEB, Kroger type thing. Other questions? Yes.
Fish like cod, flounder, health benefits?
Those are all great. So great sources of protein, great nutrients. Where you're going to get the most omega-3s is usually our salmon and our wild caught trout. Even our tuna will have that as well. We just don't get as much from our other fish. It's still there, but we're just not getting the higher level like what we want. But still great sources of nutrients, great sources of protein. Even a lot of vitamins and herbs or vitamins and minerals that are in our fish that we discount off.
Well, I try to buy wild caught.
Yes.
Does the farmed have? It doesn't have as much as the other.
Yeah, and so that's an excellent question too. Farm raised versus wild caught fish benefits. And you can read a lot online about this, about how they raise it, and some is correct, some is not. I'll tell you, I do a lot of grocery tours at HEB with students, and I've asked the same question to them because they were doing a demo in the meat market seafood area, and I was like, okay, so tell me where I need to be educating folks at this, because it's a question of mine as well as what should I be choosing, because a farm raised is always cheaper, it looks different, but what's better? And so at HEB, I can't speak for other locations, but at HEB, they have a very strict policy of what they buy that is farm raised and what they do not. So a lot of these documentaries you would see about how they're raising farm raised is probably not the case of what HEB is buying. Now, nutritionally, the diets are different. It's kind of like a chicken that's given an organic diet versus regular or eggs or that type of thing. The diet of wild caught is what's in the sea. The diet of farm raised is a little bit different. So your omega-3s are going to be a little bit better of our wild caught. That doesn't mean our farm raised is bad to eat or that we shouldn't eat it. It's a little bit more economical, but we're not going to get as much from the wild caught as we would, or as much from the farm raised as we would the wild caught.
Well, I heard the sources on farmed is different. U.S. because of regulations. There's spotty ones. China, some other countries. It's actually can be worse. Documentaries I've seen.
Yes, and that's why when I look at the fish, personally, I look to see is it raised in the U.S.
Country of origin.
Yes, yeah, and where is it? But like I said, I know HEB has very strict guidelines of what they buy or don't buy and how it's tested. But personally, I always look for, like even shrimp. I always look for the Gulf shrimp or something in Texas or U.S. versus something that's Indonesia or other countries, just because of the level of hands it goes through compared to where it's going from the coast here or whatnot. Yeah, excellent question though.
What about mercury levels in wild caught versus farm raised?
Yeah, so mercury levels in wild caught versus farm raised. They say a lot of the wild caught has higher mercury levels because of what they're eating. So those fish that they're eating have higher mercury levels. Tuna being one of those too. So they'll say the white albacore tuna in a can has higher mercury than the other. We'd have to eat a lot of it to really be that exposed to the mercury levels, even for pregnant females too. That was always one of my concerns as well. How much should I be eating and that type of thing? And when you really look at it and you talk and look at the research, the amount that we'd have to eat would be a significant amount every day. So the benefit of eating fish outweighs the I'm scared of mercury debate, but certainly your wild caught is going to have a little bit more of that, and we can't control as much as we can the farm raised part. Other questions? Yes,
You
sir.
mentioned the health benefits of coffee. Would you repeat the recommendation for cups per day?
Yes, I would say no more than 4 cups per day. That would be an 8-ounce cup of that. Some will say 4 to 5. I usually say around 4 would be no more than that. And that's really just because of the caffeine content. And overdoing too much caffeine, it's kind of like energy drinks and that type of thing. We don't want too much of that to where we're overstimulated, and then when we have it again, we don't even feel an effect, and our threshold for caffeine now increases. Yes?
What do you think about the multivitamin? Take one a day instead of an individual?
Yeah, so the question was multivitamin, and are my thoughts on that? I certainly recommend it. I kind of term it an insurance policy for most people. Especially as we age too, if we're not eating as much, or even kids as well, if they're not getting all the foods in that they want or need, a multivitamin is great to be choosing. So I would certainly not recommend going and taking every different vitamin unless we're truly deficient in B12 or deficient in vitamin D, and we have a lab result to prove that. Because we can overdo it too, and we can also spend a lot of money on vitamins that are water soluble, and we're just urinating them out. So just a general multivitamin is perfectly appropriate for most of the population.
And I read recently that as women age, they need a lot less iron, and so it's really not a good idea for women after a certain age, I'm not sure what, to take iron supplements because it stores in the body.
Yeah, so iron in women as they age. So if we think about too, we talk about younger females needing more iron because of menstrual cycle, and so losing the blood mass, we're doing a little bit more activity, we need that blood flow. Well, 50 plus, through menopause, we don't have the menstrual cycle, we're not losing the iron stores, so yes, our iron needs do change. Pregnancy, they're much higher because we're doing for both. So when you're looking at elderly with our iron, we don't need as much. It can cause more constipation too if we're taking a supplement or having too much of it. So it wouldn't be something that I would say we need to cut completely out, but it's something that we don't need as much of as a younger type adult.
I think the article says something that can help cause liver failure.
Yeah, and it can build up. Iron is one of the things that it's not fat soluble, but it can build up in our body, and we don't want to overdo that. So there's certainly no need to take a supplement, especially for postmenopausal, especially if there's no known deficiency of it, because it can cause more harm than good. Yeah. And I'm happy to stay after and answer any questions personal that you might have. Next week is going to be sports nutrition, which will be fun. So we'll talk about eating before, during, after exercise, talk a little bit more about how to fuel even just the everyday athlete, so you don't have to be this marathon runner to come. It can be an everyday exerciser or someone who is trying to take their exercise to a higher level. So we'll talk through that next Tuesday.
Awesome. All right, as always, we will always send out an email for those of you who registered for this event, and that will include the presentation as well as the TTV and link. So if you want to hear what we discussed today, you can have access to that. And then the PowerPoint presentation will go up on our website. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but we started a YouTube channel that is basically all of Megan's recordings. So every single one of her presentations is up on the Human Resources YouTube channel. And we will continue to do that and have them available. So share the word, let people in your offices know that if they weren't able to come, they can always check back in. And then the presentations will be online as well. So awesome. Y'all take care. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.